That woman married my father for his money, and she was never even a real soldier. She checked identification cards at a gate. My stepdaughter said it into a microphone in a rented ballroom in front of the 106 people I graduated high school with 30 years ago. She had a stack of printouts in her hand, and she was shaking them at me like a verdict. I did not stand up. I did not ask for the microphone. I sat down and I set my tote bag on the floor by my foot, and I let her finish. To explain why I stayed in that chair, I have to go back about 4 years to a kitchen in northern Michigan and a man who could not swallow his soup. My name is Denise Marchetti. I am 49 years old. I work nights at the County Emergency Dispatch Center, the place your call goes when you dial 911 and your voice is not working right. 12-hour shifts, 4 on, 3 off, in a room with no windows and one coffee pot that has been burning the same pot since the Bush administration, near enough. Before that, I was in the army. I raised my hand at 19 because the alternative was another winter at the fish processing plant in Alpena, and I stayed for 21 years. When people around here ask what I did, I tell them I worked with other people's paperwork. That is true. It is the smallest true thing I can say, and for most of my life it has been the most useful. I want to be honest with you about something, because this whole story turns on it. I let people believe the small version. Frank's family decided early that I had been a gate guard, a woman with a clipboard waving cars through in the rain. Deb said it once at a 4th of July cookout, holding a paper plate laughing in a friendly way that was not friendly. She said, "Denise stood at a gate for 20 years and now she sits at a desk. Some people are just built for a chair." I did not correct her. Part of that is the job I actually had. When you spend a decade taking statements from people who are lying to you, you learn that the person who talks least in a room is usually the person holding the most. You let a story run. You let it get comfortable. You let it get specific, because specific is where a lie starts leaving fingerprints. And part of it is plain tiredness. It is easier to be underestimated than to explain yourself at a folding table with potato salad going warm in the sun. So they kept their small version of me. Gate guard. Clipboard. A woman who got lucky with an older man. Let them have it. It cost me nothing, until it started costing a 6-year-old. I met Frank Marchetti in the waiting area of a tyre shop on a Tuesday in November. The television in the corner was showing a cooking competition with the sound off, and he was reading the subtitles out loud in a terrible French accent to nobody in particular. I laughed before I decided to. He was 62 then. I was 41. He had been a mechanic for the County Road Commission for 34 years, and he had hands that never came all the way clean, and he apologized for that about once a week for the rest of his life. We married 2 years later at the courthouse in Alpena on a Thursday morning with 9 people in the room. My mother, his brother Ray, Ingrid Sowell, who I had known since we were both 14. His daughter Kayla did not come. She was invited. She had a hard week, is what the message said, and I took that at face value because I had decided the day I met Frank that I was not going to be a woman who kept score against a child of his. She was 26 and already had Rosie by then, a baby with a full head of black hair and a temper you could hear from the driveway. At the reception, which was really just a room at a supper club with a cake on a card table, Frank's cousin Deb did the math out loud. 64 and 43, she said. That is 21 years. That is a whole grown man's worth of difference. Frank laughed it off. He was good at that. He put his arm across the back of my chair and said, "She has better knees than me, Deb. Somebody has to shovel." But I saw Terry across the room doing the other math. The one nobody says out loud at a wedding. The house math. The pension math. The what happens when he goes math. They started counting the day we signed. I just did not know yet that they had already decided what the total was going to be. The soup was tomato out of a can on a Sunday in March. Frank took 2 spoonfuls and set the spoon down and looked at it like it had insulted him. He said it kept stopping halfway. He tapped the middle of his chest with 2 fingers. He said it was nothing he had swallowed wrong. He was fine. He was not fine. I am not going to walk you through the appointments. If you have sat in those chairs, you already know the carpet pattern and the sound the door makes. What I will tell you is that it took 11 months, and that for 11 months I ran that house the way I used to run a case file. There was a spiral notebook on the counter by the toaster. Every dose, every time, every temperature, in ink initialed. Not because anyone asked, because when you are frightened, structure is the only thing you can actually hold. Frank thought it was funny at first. He called it the logbook. Toward the end, he stopped calling it anything and just watched me write in it, the way you watch weather. In the 4th month, when he was still sharp and still walking, he asked me to drive him to an attorney's office above the hardware store on Chisholm Street. He would not tell me why until we were parked. Then he said he wanted his affairs squared away while he was the one doing the squaring, so that nobody could say later that somebody had done it for him. I told him I did not want to be in the room. He said, "That is exactly why you are going to be in the parking lot." So I sat in the truck with the heater running for 40 minutes. He went up alone. The attorney brought in a notary and 2 witnesses from the insurance office next door, people neither of us had ever met, and Frank signed everything in front of all 4 of them. I want you to hold on to that detail. 2 strangers, a notary and an attorney, in a room I was never in. It mattered later, more than anything else in this story. He died on a Wednesday in early autumn, at home with the porch light on because he liked the porch light on. The funeral was at the parish hall. Casseroles, folding chairs, the flag that comes back to you folded into a triangle so tight it feels like a stone. His brother Ray held my hand and could not talk. Deb hugged me hard and cried on my collar and told me I had been so good to him. Kayla waited until the parking lot. She was standing by my truck with her keys already in her hand, and she was not crying, and she said, "I want a list of everything of his that is in that house. Not hello, not I am sorry, a list." I told her yes. I told her the attorney would file a full accounting with the court, and she would get a copy of it, the same as me, the same as everyone. She looked at me for a second too long. Then she said, "You are good at paperwork, that is what worries me." She got in her car and left before the last hymn had even finished inside. I stood there in the gravel, holding a triangle of folded fabric, and I remember thinking very clearly that this was going to be a long few years. I had no idea it was going to end with a microphone. Rosie came to me in June, 9 months after the funeral. She was 6. She had her grandfather's black hair and a stubbornness that could stop traffic, and a way of announcing her opinions like small weather reports. She had also just had the worst summer of her short life, and I am going to be careful here because that summer belongs to her and not to me. What I will say is this. Her mother had been struggling for a long time before Frank died, and losing him took away the last person who had been quietly plugging the holes. By June, there were school calls. There were nights that nobody could account for. There was one particular afternoon that ended with a county caseworker sitting on my porch steps with a clipboard, asking me if I was willing. Willing. I have thought about that word a lot. It is such a soft little word for what it actually asks. Kayla went into a residential treatment program on a Monday. The county gave me temporary guardianship of Rosie on the Thursday. That is how fast a life reorganizes itself. 4 days, 1 signature, and suddenly I was buying the kind of cereal that has a cartoon on the box. I switched to permanent nights at dispatch so I could take her to school in the mornings. I slept in pieces. I learned that a 6-year-old will not go to sleep in an unfamiliar house unless the porch light is on, which I found out on the 2nd night, and which I have never once mentioned to anybody in the family because it is not theirs. She was scared. She was angry. She was 6. And in August, sitting on my kitchen floor with a broken crayon in her fist, she looked up at me and asked, "Are you the one who took my mummy's money?" I want you to sit with that for a second. 6 years old. Somebody had put that sentence inside her. I knelt down on the linoleum so we were the same height, and I told her the truth in the smallest words I had. I said nobody took anything. I said her mummy was getting help, and that help costs money, and grown-ups were making sure it got paid for. I said her grandpa left things behind for her, specifically for her, and that when she was big, I would show her every single page. She thought about it. Then she asked if she could have a different crayon because the blue one was broken, and that was the end of the interrogation. But I stood up in that kitchen with a hole in me because I knew exactly whose sentence that was, and I knew exactly which kitchen table it had been said at. Here is how a story about you gets built when you are not in the room. It does not start with a lie. That is the part people get wrong. It starts with a true thing said in a certain tone. True thing. Denise married a man 21 years older than her. True thing. The house is in her name now. True thing. Kayla is in treatment and Denise has the little girl. Say those 3 sentences at a holiday table with the right pause between them, and you have not technically lied about anything, and you have still built a woman who does not exist. Deb was the engine of it. I do not think she woke up in the morning intending harm. I think she liked being the one who knew things. Every family has a person who is the newspaper, and a newspaper needs a front page. Terry was the amplifier. Terry would repeat whatever Deb said, but shorter and meaner, with the kind of confidence that makes people assume he had checked. By Thanksgiving it had a shape. By Christmas it had a title. She took the estate. It came back to me from 3 directions in a single month. Ray called, embarrassed to ask whether it was true that I had gotten the pension. A woman at the grocery store on Ripley touched my arm in the produce section and said she was praying for our family during this difficult time, in a voice with a question mark hiding in it. A neighbor mentioned very casually that somebody had asked her whether I had a lawyer. Every one of those I let pass. I know how that sounds. From the outside, silence looks like a confession. From the inside, it felt like the only door that did not lead somewhere worse. Rosie was in my house. Rosie's mother was in a program 40 miles away, trying to save her own life. And I had spent enough years in interview rooms to know exactly what happens when you go to war with a family in public. The family closes ranks. The story hardens. And the person who ends up standing in the middle of that fire is never the adult who started it. It is the kid. So I made a decision that I would make again, though I would make it faster this time. I decided I would not defend myself at a dinner table. Silence is not the same thing as agreement, but I will tell you honestly, it looks exactly like it. Ingrid Sowell is the reason this story has an ending instead of just a middle. Ingrid and I failed chemistry together at 14, and she went off and became an accountant anyway, which I have never let her forget. She has an office in a converted house by the credit union, a laugh like a screen door, and absolutely no patience for suffering in silence. She came over in February with a lemon cake nobody wanted, and let me talk for about 10 minutes before she put her hand flat on my kitchen table. She said, "Stop. You are arguing the wrong case." I said I was not arguing at all. That was the point. She said, "You are arguing at every dinner, in your head, with people who are not going to hear you no matter how well you do it. Denise, you are trying to win an argument. Win a document instead." I asked what that meant. She said, "Petition the probate court for a formal accounting, a real one, filed. Every asset, every payment, every dollar in and out with the backup attached. Not for them, for the file. So that when somebody finally asks the question out loud, the answer is already sitting on a shelf with a date stamp on it." I told her the attorney had already filed a summary and Kayla had already gotten a copy. Ingrid said, "A summary is a sentence. I'm talking about the whole book." So I did it. I filed the petition in March. It took 9 weeks and it cost me $1,900 I did not particularly have. And when it came back, it was the strangest object I have ever owned. Spiral bound, thick as a phone book, tabbed with those little coloured plastic flags. Every asset appraised, every payment listed by date and purpose, and behind each tab stapled the actual copies, cancelled checks, front and back, statements, receipts from the funeral home, the bill from the hospital. I sat with it at my kitchen table one night in May, going through it with a cup of coffee going cold beside me, and I had the oddest feeling. It was the first time in 2 years that I had felt like myself. Because this is what I actually did for 21 years. Not a gate, not a clipboard. This. Documents in order. Timeline built. Facts stacked so tight that nothing can slide. I put it on the shelf in the hall closet next to the vacuum, and I told myself that was the end of it. 6 weeks later, a different envelope came, and it was not from the court. It was from the county. Adult Protective Services, which is a phrase you never expect to see with your own name under it. Somebody had filed a complaint alleging that I had financially exploited a vulnerable adult. The vulnerable adult was Frank, my husband, who had been dead for nearly 3 years. I sat down on the bottom stair with that letter, and I did not cry, which surprised me, and I did not call anybody, which did not. What I did was something my hands remembered before my head caught up. I turned the letter over and I started writing on the back of it. Date received, envelope postmark, case number, name of the investigator listed at the bottom. 21 years of training, and the first thing it gives you back in a crisis is the impulse to start a log. The investigator's name was Michelle Ocampo, and she came out on a Tuesday morning in July. I had been awake since my shift ended at 7, and I did not care. I want to describe what she walked into. I had a fresh pot of coffee on. I had cleared the dining room table completely. On it, squared to the edge, were the spiral accounting 4 years of statements from my own bank, Frank's attorney's contact information on an index card, the guardianship paperwork, and a 1-page timeline I had typed myself, from the date I met Frank to the date the letter arrived. Mrs. Ocampo stood in my doorway with her bag on her shoulder and looked at that table for a good 3 seconds. Then she said, "Ma'am, in 11 years I have never had this happen." I said, "Cream or black?" She worked through it for 2.5 hours. I answered what she asked and nothing more, which is a discipline and one I am good at. She had questions about the house. I turned to the tab. Questions about the life insurance. I turned to the tab. She asked why there were payments going out of Frank's account in the months right after the funeral. And there they were, every one of them itemized. Funeral home, hospital balance, the attorney's fee for the guardianship petition, all approved by the court, all with a cancelled cheque stapled behind it. Then she got to the 6th tab and she stopped. She went through it once. She went back to the front of it and went through it again. She turned 2 of the checks over and looked at the backs of them where the endorsement stamps are. She did not say anything for what felt like a full minute. Then she said very quietly, "Mrs. Marchetti, do the people who filed this complaint know what is in this section?" I told her the truth. I said no. I said the section had never come up because I had never brought it up, because it was not anybody's business, and because Frank and I had agreed at the time that it would never be used as a stick. She closed the folder and put both hands on top of it. She said, "It is going to come up." Here is what was behind the 6th tab. When Kayla went into her first program, 4 years before any of this, the intake centre wanted a deposit up front, and her insurance would not cover the residential portion. Frank could not swing it. He had a mechanic's pension and a paid-off house and about as much slack as you would expect. I paid it, $19,400 in 3 payments from my own account out of my army retirement pay and the checking account I had brought into the marriage. And 2 years before that, before Frank and I were even married, when Kayla was trying to get through the dental hygiene program at the community college and dropped out because of a tuition balance she could not clear, I paid that too. $11,600 over 4 semesters directly to the bursar's office. She never knew. That was the condition Frank and I set, and I set it, not him. He wanted to tell her. I said no. I said if she finds out that the stepmother paid, she will spend the whole program feeling like she owes somebody and she will quit again. And I did not put that money down to buy myself a debt I could collect. $31,000, near enough out of my own pocket for the woman who would one day stand up and call me a thief. I did not do it to be admired. I want to be clear about that. I did it because Frank could not sleep, and because a young woman was drowning, and because I had the money and she did not, and that arithmetic is not complicated, no matter how many years you spend in uniform. But it does change the shape of a certain sentence, does it not? The county's letter came in September. 1 page. It said the allegation of financial exploitation was not substantiated, that no evidence of wrongdoing had been found, and that the matter was shut. 2 sentences of my life, cleared by a stranger in a state office. I remember standing in the hall with it, and the thing I felt was not relief, it was something flatter and stranger. Because I had the answer now. I had it in writing, on letterhead, with a signature, and there was not one honest place in the world to put it. You cannot mail a letter like that to 12 relatives. You cannot bring it to Thanksgiving. The moment you hand somebody proof they did not ask for, you stop being innocent and you start being a person with a case, and every single one of them would have decided I was covering something. So I did what I have always done. I put it behind the 7th tab. I set the folder back on the shelf next to the vacuum. And I went to work that night and took 41 calls from strangers who needed somebody calm on the other end of a phone. The reunion invitation had been stuck to my refrigerator since June under a magnet shaped like a walleye. 30 years since Huron Shore High School. First Saturday in October. The Birchwood Inn, the one out on the Lake Road, with the carpet that has been the same pattern since we were seniors. Cash bar buffet name tags with our senior pictures printed on them, which is a cruelty nobody has ever explained to me. I was not going. I had a reason ready for everybody who asked. Nights, guardianship, a child who had turned 7 in August and had homework now and did not do well with new sitters. All true. All of it also a coat I was putting on over the real reason, which was that I did not want to stand in a room full of people from the life before this one and answer the question, "How have you been?" Ingrid came to the door on the Thursday before with a garment bag over her arm and did not knock. She said, "I have already paid for your ticket. It is non-refundable. I am not a wealthy woman." I said I had nothing to wear, which was how she knew she had won, and she unzipped the bag. Here is the part I still think about. I put the folder in my tote bag before I left. Not for any reason I could have defended. Mrs. Ocampo had asked for one more copy of the 6th tab for her own file, and the county office was already shut when I passed it, and the whole thing ended up in the back of my truck with a spare pair of shoes. In the parking lot of the Birchwood Inn, I picked the tote bag up, and then I set it back down on the seat and thought, no. You are not walking into your class reunion with a legal folder. That is a sad thing to do. I got out. I got 2 steps. Then I turned around and took it because it was the county's copy, and it was raining, and my truck bed leaks, and I did not want it turning to soup in the parking lot. That is the whole reason. Weather and a leaky truck bed. I have made better decisions in my life than that one, and none of them have paid me back like it did. The ballroom was exactly what you are picturing. Round tables, white cloths, a chandelier doing its best, a photo board on an easel by the door. People were kind. That is what surprised me. Marcy Pelletier grabbed me by both arms. The whole back row of the marching band relocated to my table. And at table 9 near the windows, there was a man sitting with his back to the wall, watching the room, the way I watch a room. I knew that posture. I did not know his face right away. He had the kind of build that 50 does to a wrestler, and a name tag I had to squint at from across the room. Curtis Halverson. I remembered a quiet kid who worked at the marina and once fixed my locker with a butter knife. That was all I had. He caught me looking and lifted his glass about an inch off the table. That was the entire conversation we had before it happened. At 10 minutes to 9, the doors at the back of the ballroom opened. Kayla walked in. She was not on any list. She did not go to Huron Shore. She was 32 years old, and she was wearing a good coat, and she had a manila envelope under her arm, and she came straight down the side of the room, past the buffet with Deb about 6 feet behind her. I knew what it was before she reached the front. There is a particular walk that people have when they have been rehearsing something in a car. She went to the little riser where the microphone was, the one the reunion committee had been using to announce door prizes, and she picked it up, and the disc jockey turned the music down because he assumed she was somebody's wife with an announcement. And then she said my name. She said, "Denise Marchetti. Some of you knew my father." The room did that thing rooms do. 200 small sounds stopping at once. She had the printouts out of the envelope by then, and she was going through them one at a time out loud, and her voice was shaking, but her hands were not. She said there were withdrawals from my father's checking account in the 4 months after he died. She named the amounts. She named the dates. She said the house on Long Rapids Road was not in his name anymore. She said she had been in a program and could not watch her own father's estate, and that by the time she was clear again, everything was already gone. And then she got to the part she had come to say. That woman married my father for his money, and she was never even a real soldier. She checked identification cards at a gate. Somebody at the table behind me breathed out one short syllable, the sound you make when a car goes off the road in front of you. I could feel 106 people find me in that room. Here is what I want you to understand about that moment, because it is the hinge of my whole life. Every instinct I had was to stand up. Every year of training was screaming a very specific thing, which was that when a person is presenting evidence and getting it wrong, you correct it immediately before the wrong version sets. And I did not, because she was not wrong on purpose. I could hear it in her voice. She believed every word she was saying. Somebody had walked her through those printouts at a kitchen table and told her what they meant, and she had gone away and built a year of her recovery on top of it, and she was standing up there in a rented ballroom in a good coat, doing what she believed was the bravest thing she had ever done. You do not fight a person like that. You cannot. Not in a room. Not with a microphone in their hand. So I sat down. I set my tote bag on the floor by my foot. I put my hands flat on the tablecloth, the way you do when you want them to stop shaking. And I let her finish. She finished. She stood there breathing hard, and in the quiet, a chair scraped back at table 9. Curtis Halverson stood up with his napkin still in his hand. He did not raise his voice. He did not have to. The room was so quiet you could hear the ice machine down the hall. He said, "Ma'am, I am sorry to interrupt. My name is Curtis Halverson. I graduated with this class. For the last 20 years, I have been a special agent with the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service, and going through paperwork like the paperwork in your hand is the entire thing I do for a living." Kayla stared at him. He said, "You are standing in front of 100 people making a very serious allegation. I am not going to let that happen in a room I am sitting in without somebody looking at the actual documents. May I see what you have?" She hesitated. Then she handed him the printouts because when you are certain you hand things over, that is the whole tragedy of it. She was certain. He looked through them standing up. It took maybe 40 seconds. Then he turned to me and he said, "Mrs. Marchetti, is there a filed accounting in this estate?" And I said the only 2 words I said out loud the whole time my stepdaughter was standing on that riser. I said, "In here." I picked up the tote bag and set it on the tablecloth and slid the folder across to him, and I sat back down. He opened it on the corner of table 9 next to a plate of somebody's untouched cake, and he started going through it out loud so the room could follow. He said, "You listed 4 withdrawals from your father's checking account. Here they are. The first one is to the Wilkerson Funeral Home, $8,206. The check is stapled behind the tab. The second one is a balance to the hospital, $6,940, also here. The third and fourth are attorney fees, both approved by the probate court, both listed on page 9 of a filing that was mailed to you at your last known address in April of that year. Kayla said something. It did not reach the microphone. He said, "You said the house is not in his name." "That is correct. It is not in hers either." He turned 2 pages. "The property on Long Rapids Road was placed into a trust. The beneficiary named in that trust is a minor child. The initials are RM. Mrs. Marchetti is listed as trustee, which means she manages it, and she cannot sell it, and she does not own it, and every dollar that comes out of it has to be accounted for to a court." I heard Ingrid 3 tables over make a small sound. "Signed by your father," Curtis said, 11 months before he passed in the office of an attorney in Alpena, in front of a notary and 2 witnesses, who work at an insurance agency and had never met either of these women. If you want to challenge that, you would be challenging 4 disinterested people and a notary seal. And I will tell you honestly, Mom, I have taken apart a lot of documents, and this one is clean. He kept going. He got to the 6th tab, and he stopped the way Mrs. Ocampo had stopped. He said, "Mom, I want to ask you something before I continue. In the fall of the year you entered the residential program in Gaylord, do you know who paid the intake deposit?" Kayla said her father had. Curtis turned the folder around and held it up. And even from where I sat, I could see the pale green rectangles. He said, $19,400 in 3 checks. They are not drawn on your father's account. They are drawn on an account at the credit union on Ripley Street belonging to Denise Marchetti. Front and back, endorsed and cashed by the treatment centre. And behind them there are 4 more, going back 2 years earlier, made out to the bursar's office at the community college for a tuition balance in your name. $11,600. Nobody in that ballroom moved. He said, "That is a little over $31,000 out of her pay for you, before she was married to your father. Some of it before she had met you." Kayla's face did something I do not have the vocabulary for. Curtis turned 1 more page. He said, "Behind the 7th tab, there is a letter from this county, dated last month, closing a complaint that was filed against her, alleging exploitation of your father. Not substantiated, no evidence found. I would like to know who filed that complaint, because it was not you, ma'am. Your name is not on it." And Kayla turned around and looked at Deb. Deb was already at the back doors. I would love to tell you that I felt something magnificent at that moment. I did not. I felt tired, and I felt sorry for a woman in a good coat holding an empty envelope. Then Curtis got to the last thing in the folder, which was not evidence of anything. It was there because the county had asked for proof of my income when they gave me guardianship, and I had never taken it back out. It was my discharge paperwork from the army. He went quiet for a second. Then he said, "I am going to finish because somebody in this room said out loud that this woman was never really a soldier, and I am not walking out of here with that hanging in the air." He looked at the page. He said, "Entered service in 1996, separated 21 years later. Military occupation listed as military police investigator. There is a criminal investigations assignment here of 10 years and 4 months. 2 deployments. Retired at the grade of Sergeant First Class." He looked up at me and he said, "Are these dates correct, Sergeant?" I did not stand. I did not make a speech. I have never in my life said my own rank out loud in a room that was not required to hear it. I just nodded. And 106 people in a rented ballroom in northern Michigan started getting to their feet, 1 table at a time. I will tell you what I did next, and I am aware it is not the satisfying thing. Kayla had sat down. Not in a chair at a table, just down on the edge of the riser with the microphone still in her hand and the empty envelope in her lap. She was making a sound I recognized from 21 years of walking into other people's worst nights. Everyone in that room was looking at her the way you look at something that is finished. So I got up and went to the buffet table and I took a cloth napkin and a glass of water, and I walked across that ballroom in front of everybody and I crouched down in front of my stepdaughter and I put the water in her hand and I folded her fingers around it. She would not look at me. She said, "They told me. They showed me the pages. They said you had it all." I said, I know. She said, why did you never say anything? And I told her the truth, which was that the only person who was going to get burned by that argument was a little girl who was already carrying more than she should be, and that I would rather be called a thief for a year than have Rosie grow up in the middle of a war between the two women who were raising her. Deb was gone. She had left her purse at table 4, and somebody had to run it out to the parking lot. Terry called me 11 days later to explain that he had never actually believed any of it. I let him say the whole thing. Then I thanked him for calling and hung up, and I have not thought about him since, which is its own kind of mercy for both of us. I did not sue anybody. I know some of you are hoping I did. I could have. Ingrid had opinions. But I have spent my whole working life around consequences, and here is what I have learned about them. The consequence had already happened. Nothing I could have done to Deb Marchetti would have been worse than standing at the back of a ballroom while a federal agent went through documents that proved she had built a year of family gossip on 4 cancelled checks she never understood. She has not been to a family gathering since. Nobody made that rule. It made itself. The truth did that. I did not have to. What I did instead was sit down at my kitchen table 2 weeks later with Kayla across from me and Ingrid at the end and a legal pad in front of us and write something. Not a promise. I will not accept promises anymore. Promises are what people give you when they want the conversation to be over. We wrote milestones. 9 months clean verified, not self-reported. Steady employment for 6 of them. Her own place with a lease in her own name. Family counselling together with a woman in Petoskey who does not put up with either of us. Supervised visits first, then unsupervised days, then weekends, in that order, and no order skipped, and any skipped step starts the clock over. And at the bottom, in her handwriting, the part I did not ask for. She wrote that guardianship stays with me until every line above it is finished, and that if she disagreed with my judgment on any of it, the counsellor decides, and not her, and not me. Her hand was shaking when she signed it. Mine was not, and I am not proud of that. I have a steady hand in the wrong moments. It is a professional deformity. Rosie was not in the room. That was the one thing I insisted on. Children should not have to watch their parents negotiate for them. They should only ever be handed the finished thing. That was almost 4 years ago. Kayla hit the 9 months, then 18. She works at a veterinary clinic out on the highway, and she is very good at it. And last spring she finished the dental hygiene program. She once had to leave. She paid the tuition herself. She would not let me anywhere near it. I stayed out of it, and I cried in my truck about it exactly once. Rosie is 11 now. She is at her mother's every other weekend and every Tuesday for dinner. And she comes back on Sunday nights, smelling like somebody else's laundry soap, which took me longer to get used to than I expected. Guardianship is still with me. We are both fine with that. We stopped treating it as a scoreboard about 2 years ago. Last month, I went up in the attic looking for storm windows, and I found the garment bag with my old dress uniform in it. I brought it down. I do not know why. I laid it out on the dining room table, and I got the velvet box out of the drawer and opened it, and I sat there in the afternoon light for a while with a cup of coffee looking at all of it. Rosie came in and asked what it was. I told her it was what I used to wear to work a long time ago. She looked at the box and at the ribbons, and she said, "Is that the stuff that man talked about at the party?" She was 7 at the reunion. She was not this. Somebody told her about it, and she has carried it around ever since, the way kids carry the one story about you that made them feel proud. I said yes, more or less. And she said, "Can I have this one when you die?" Pointing at the smallest one in the box, which is not the important one, which is exactly why it was perfect. Her drawing is still taped to the wall behind that table. It is 4 years old and curling at the corners, and it shows a house and a porch light and 2 people who are approximately the same size, which I have never had the heart to ask her about. Here is what I know now that I did not know standing in that hallway with a letter from the county in my hand. You cannot argue your way into being seen correctly. I tried in my head for 2 years at dinner tables I was not even sitting at. It does not work. People do not put a story down because you shouted at it. What works is quieter and slower and much less satisfying. You keep the truth in order. You put it where a date stamp can find it. You do the right thing when nobody is watching. And you do it without leaving a bill on the table for it. And then you go on and live your life, and you accept that you may never get the room, the microphone, and the man at table 9. I got mine. Most people do not. That does not make the folder a waste of time, because the folder was never for the ballroom. It was for a girl with black hair who is going to be old enough one day to ask exactly what happened in her family, and who deserves to be handed the whole book instead of somebody's version of it. If this story meant something to you, share it with somebody who has been quietly holding a truth they have never had the right room to say it in. And if you would like to sit with me again for another one, I would be glad of the company.